Amen. And it is through the book of Colossians that Paul teaches and writes and explains who Christ is and the impact that Christ has on our lives. And when Paul authored Colossians, he was actually speaking the book of Colossians. He was actually speaking it, and there was a scribe who was in the prison cell with him actually writing what Paul was saying. As he was speaking chapter 1, a scribe was writing it. Speaking chapter 2, a scribe was writing it. Speaking chapter 3, a scribe was writing it. Speaking chapter 4, a scribe was writing. And as he gets down to his final words, gets down to his last statement to wrap up his correspondence to the church, he says, wait a minute, scribe, let me write this last verse. And since they didn't have ink pen and paper, it wasn't created then, he borrowed his quill and began to write on his papyrus. And he says, let me write this last verse myself. He says, I, Paul, write this with my own hand. Remember my chains. Grace be with you. Paul was tired. Paul was weary, but still standing strong. And he desires to end this book to the church at Colossae. But what an interesting phrase to insert. I can understand how he would write, I'm writing this with my own hand. And I can understand how he would write, and grace be with you. But I find it interesting that in between those two statements, he would write, remember my chains. What an interesting thing to say, remember my chains. And as I read this verse, Paul is referring to his physical condition. But I want to pause and reflect here, because Paul isn't the only one in chains. Last Sunday, we celebrated the new year. God gave us a new year, new beginning, fresh start. And we even declared God can do a new thing. There are new expectations, new dreams, new hopes, new aspirations. God can and God will, and we expect God to do some awesome things in our lives. But I submit to you, I don't think that's everybody's testimony. Because I think there's somebody listening to me right now that when you look over at 2023, your 2023 looks bleak. Because all you see are chains. You don't perhaps expect God to do anything new in your life, because when you look and assess your life, you see chains. You see shackles. You see burdens. You see things holding you down, holding you back, hindering your progress, blocking your dreams. You're not looking forward to 2023 because you have all kinds of chains in your life. Am I talking to somebody this morning? And so I asked myself, why would Paul write this phrase, remember my chains? Keep in mind that he had just had a scribe who had written the majority of the book, and he is writing this last verse. And I can imagine as he is writing, he is saying, I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. And as he is comparing his handwriting to the handwriting of his scribe, he sees these pieces of metal clinking on to his wrists, and he's not able to write the way his scribe is writing. His writing is a little bit below par. His writing is not the writing that he wants, but it's the writing that he has. His writing is below his ability because he has some chains. He says, if you think my handwriting could be better, it's because I'm writing with some chains. If I didn't have these chains on my arms, then maybe my writing would be a little bit better. I bring this up to you today because there are a lot of people who have chains that hinder their ability to do what you think they ought to be doing. They can't operate at the level you think they ought to be operating on. They can't achieve the level of success you think they ought to be achieving on because maybe they have some chains on their arms. There are some chains you can see and some chains you can't see. Chains of mental illness, chains of addiction, chains of low self-esteem, chains of disease, chains of lack of encouragement during their younger formative years, chains on their thinking. Some people don't choose to be better because they don't think they deserve better. And if we remembered that some people have changed, maybe, just maybe, we'd be a little bit less critical of people who are not able to achieve what you think they ought to be achieving. Am I right about it? Maybe we could catch ourselves from being a little bit too cynical or complaining when we understood that people have changed. All of us have some kind of change.